evil is a category of human misbehavior, human intention, that we don't understand significantly at the level of the brain. But if we did understand it totally at the level of the brain, then every evil person we had in the dock at trial would be just like Charles Whitman with his brain tumor after he shot up everyone at the University of Texas, right? So like he's the prototypically evil mass murderer, but he's complaining about this change that overcame his personality, and he thinks it would be a good idea that if after the cops kill me, you autopsy my brain because I don't know why I'm doing any of this, right? And lo and behold, he had a glioblastoma pressing on his amygdala, and all of a sudden it made sense of his behavior in a way that a full understanding of psychopathy or every other variant of human evil would make sense of it in a way that would be deflationary ethically.
Okay.
And then you would look at someone like Saddam Hussein, or the worst evil person you could imagine, and you would say, well, he's actually unlucky. There but for the grace of biology go I. Because if I had that brain, if I had those genes, if I had those influences that gave me those synapses, I would be just like him. Now, if you think there's some other element that gives us free will, and now then you and I are disagreeing, then that's a factual claim that's at variance with mine. But if we are just on some level malfunctioning biological systems when we're being evil, then a complete understanding of evil would cancel that category.
Can you define evil so we know what you're talking about?
Well, take just the worst people who have sadistically victimized the most people, and those are the evilest people we can name.
So wait a second. So when you say, I think this is actually really important, because I think actual evil of that kind is pretty darn rare, and there's a lot of badness that emerges from a kind
Well, the
of
most troubling thing are
rationality.
all the good people doing evil because they're ruled by bad ideas. I mean, that I think is more consequential than actual evil people.
We introduced a whole set of other things here in the last little round about
but-
free will and evil. But
I just want to make it clear why I went there. So you were saying this is I forgot the word you used, inevitable or ineluctable or it's permanent. The implication is that this category is permanent, and I'm saying that I don't think evil in that sense is a permanent category for us.
Okay.
It awaits more information and insight.
Okay, we're going to distinguish for a minute good versus evil and good versus bad, just for the sake of conceptual clarity. In the moral landscape, you make a fundamental axiomatic claim. It looks like a moral claim. Maybe it's a claim of fact, and the claim is there are bad lives and good lives.
Sure.
And the claim you make is that that's universally true.
Well, it's true for the requisite minds.
Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, doesn't matter.
Okay, but evil. So yes, I'm not telling you that you should purge the word evil from your vocabulary. I use the word all the time, and I think it's useful. It's a motivating word. I'm just saying that we can understand this continuum of good and bad, or positive and negative, in ways that don't use certainly don't use the Judeo-Christian framework for valuing these things. Because if you take the Buddhist framework and map it onto this continuum, you don't get good and evil. You get essentially wisdom and ignorance. Evil is ignorance of all the well-being you and others would experience if you behaved another way. Right, that's the Buddha's game, or even within Hinduism, and this connects to your love of stories. You take the Hindu text, the Ramayana, which is just a foundation. It's doing the work that the Bible is doing for Jews and Christians. In that the worst guy in the Ramayana, the 10-headed demon Ravana, the prototypically evil person, is at bottom really not a bad guy. He's a great sage who is just in a bad mood, essentially, right? I mean, he was obscured by ignorance, and so it is in the Buddhist canon. The Buddha meets a serial killer who is wearing a garland of human fingers around his neck, named Angulimala, but he was just one conversation away from being fully enlightened, right? I mean, he was like, it's a different picture of possibility. I'm not saying one is right or wrong. Let's be agnostic about that. I'm challenging your claim that there's something so prescient and useful and durable about the Judeo-Christian framework.
I wasn't making that claim.
We're stuck with it for all time.
I wasn't making that claim. I was making the claim that in the moral landscape, you laid out a distinction between the bad life and the good life. Forget about good and evil. The bad life and the good life, hell and heaven, the bad life and the good life, and that distinction was not only factual but universal. And so since
it's
you made that axiomatic,
given the right mind. So we could imagine a mind. I mean, this is an example.
Okay, universal in a right mind.
But we could create circumstances that seem perverse to us that we would recoil from. You could create a universe of perfectly matched sadists and masochists, say, right? So you have the people who are real sadists, who in our world would be terrible actors, but in their world, they're surrounded by people who want to be mistreated. Now, again,
if you're a real sadist, you never mistreat a masochist when he asks you to.
Okay, well, these are... But granted, I'm not...
Sorry,
I'm not sure the human categories even exist.
Couldn't resist.
But in undoubtedly we could create something like an artificial intelligence that could be paired this way, and that would be weird. But in my framework, it is a conceivable space of equivalent well-being, and it's not matched at all to our space, right? But it's if in fact we could inspect the conscious minds of all parties participating in that, it is not obviously absurd, in my view, to say that they are just as happy as we are in this conversation. In fact, some moments in this conversation, I would say that they might be happier.
No, it's been good. It's been good. So let me ask you a question here about well-being, because this is something I've wanted to ask you about, but we never seem to get to. Okay. So you think that we should maximize well-being, and that's part of your proposition, which I don't entirely disagree with, by the way, that we should ground our value structures in facts. But there's a black box problem there, like I think the black box problem about the a priori structure that we use to extract the facts of the world out. And the black box problem is, if we could measure well-being, it's like, yeah, that's a big problem, Sam. Like, we have measures of well-being, and they're terrible.
Yeah.
Like, they are.
No, I'm agreeing. I don't think but it's not a problem for my thesis. We don't have measures for anything we care about, really.
Yeah, but I mean, if your thesis is that if we had the measures of well-being that were appropriate, we could use them in a positive way, and the response is, but we don't have those measures, it's like, then what do we do?
Oh, no, we have measures. I mean, this conversation is a measure. I don't like that. That's a measure, right? You step on my toe and I say, ow. That's a measure. Don't do that again.
But that's not a measure of your well-being. It might be a measure of your trait neuroticism.
Well, it's a measure of...
But I mean that...
These are non-points.
No, but I mean this technically. Yeah. If you look at the well-being measures that we have, yes, they degenerate into measures of neuroticism.
No,
that's all they are.
But we don't have measures of certainty, of belief, of compassion, of joy, any of these conscious states. We have neural correlates of some of them, but we don't have. There's no helmet I can put on.
How do we use facts about them to orient ourselves in the world then?
Because we're doing that. We're doing this all the time.
You've got an instantaneous measure, though. You've got an instantaneous measure of well-being. We can all check with ourselves, see how we feel.
But it's possible to be wrong about that.
Right? Always, always wrong about it.
But it degrades as you get away from the individual's ability to check internally. On the other hand,
the internal thing isn't reliable, because
not
lots
reliable,
of times you're happy when you're doing things that are terrible for
and you
yourself.
could take a drug that would make you feel very good and would cause you to take apart your own life because it would...
You mean like cocaine, for example?
Right. It would destroy the motivational structure that gets you to do stuff of value that you're
right. So we can't use emotion, moment-to-moment emotion, as an indicator of well-being.
The instantaneous is not good, but you have a parallel problem. It looks to me like the exact mirror image, which is that you've got an integrative, long-term measure of well-being instantiated in an evolutionary belief system, but it's coming apart because we are living in circumstances that are less well mirrored. The present does not mirror the past, and therefore these truths, which you believe are timeless, are degrading rapidly.
That's part of that's exactly right, yes.
Okay, so what Sam is arguing is that the tools to pivot in order to improve our way of interacting, those are not the tools of long-standing tradition. Those are the tools of rational engagement.
Respect for that process is part of the long-standing tradition.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, but that's a big truth, man.
I agree.
That's a major league truth.
I
And
agree.
in fact, I would say the fundamental tradition, the most fundamental tradition of the West, says that respect for the process that updates moral judgment is the highest of all possible values. And that's also built into the tradition, strangely enough.
I agree it's built into the tradition, but I would argue that it is very likely to be compartmentalized. In other words, I was a little bit struck when you said that, what did you say about scaling? You said that
good reasons scale and bad reasons don't.
Isn't that the opposite of the truth?
No,
If you're calling these stories that give prescriptions for how to behave bad ideas, the point is those stories propagate very easily. So if we want to talk about the gun and whether it is loaded, the idea that the gun is definitely loaded, that scales really easily, right? You can pass that along in one sentence.
And the
People can get it.
the consequences
On the
of
other
being
hand,
wrong about a loaded gun also scale, right? So,
no.
Well, they
If you
should.
want to talk to people about very small possibilities of very dire things happening, they trip over it. It's a hard thing to get. It's almost impossible for children to get it. So the point is, the one thing does scale, a story that says, yeah, every gun is loaded. It's a false story, but that one definitely scales.
Yeah.
The statistical reality of guns and the fact that they may indeed be unloaded, but you don't want to play around with the remote possibility that one day you'll get it wrong, right? That doesn't scale because it requires you to have experience with stuff that is not common.
Right. Well, so there are two things here. One, you bring up an ancillary but very important point, which is that moral progress here is often the result of moving from our story-driven, protagonist-driven intuitions to something far more quantified.